He's on his way to the Middle East, where he plans to greet the released Israeli hostages in person. He will address the Israeli parliament and then meet with world leaders in Egypt. Joining us now to unpack all of this are two guests: Jacob Olidort, Director of American Security at America First Policy Institute, as well as David Wormser, Senior Analyst for Middle East Affairs at the Center for Security Policy. Thank you both so much for being here. Now, Jacob, starting with you, President Trump plans to greet the released Israeli hostages in person, according to Vice President Vance. Now, Israel is expecting the 20 living hostages to be released early Monday morning, in just a few hours, actually, with the Palestinian prisoners released once Israel has confirmed all their hostages have crossed into the border into Israel. What do you see being done to ensure a safe return of the hostages?
Well, thank you so much for having me. As we know from prior experiences during this horrific 2-year ordeal, Hamas will try any number of games in their playbook. We saw with the tragedy of the Bibas family how they returned a casket with a padlock without the key, and it turned out to be somebody else in there. So my impression is, obviously, the Israeli officials are preparing for any given scenario. This is especially the case with the deceased bodies. And we're already getting reports on the living hostages about a very dire condition that many of them are in, not surprisingly, in such horrific conditions. So a very, I think, intensely emotional period we're entering right now.
And David, the hostage release and prisoner swap is part one, or phase one, of the deal. Now, President Trump is set to address the Israeli Knesset and then join world leaders at a summit in Egypt. In terms of President Trump's 20-point framework here, it includes disarming Hamas and having a temporary transitional government. How much of a role do you see President Trump playing in ensuring that this peace plan gets implemented?
Well, I think the president plays a central role. He's played a central role in getting us to where we are and getting these hostages out. Really, without him, none of that would have happened. But the problem that we have going forward is that Hamas, it's a terrorist organization, so its word is not its word. And though it agreed to the agreement in the overall 20 points, it hasn't had specific agreement on all those 20 points. And now it's walking back. It claims it won't give up power and it won't surrender its weapons. And we see really a civil war emerging among the Palestinians in Gaza because there are factions that now have sided with Israel. And because Hamas doesn't want to give up power, it is right now slaughtering those factions and those clans. So there's an immense bloodletting already underway there among Palestinians. And that tells me they have no intention of surrendering power or their weapons in the long run. And that's going to be a real challenge for both Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump, because at the end, that might require a resumption of hostilities.
And Jacob, given all of that, what do you see as the role of Arab nations here? How do we ensure another October 7th doesn't happen?
Right. Well, further to David's point, I think we are in a very unique transition period right now. I mean, obviously, this historic moment came about in part because President Trump created such profound diplomatic isolation for Hamas among Arab partners, and I think that'll be the focus of the summit at Sharm el-Sheikh, to build on that consensus and to build a plan forward. So it'll be interesting to watch. I think a number of states, especially Qatar and Turkey, which have obviously outsized voices in Hamas's fate, their next steps in all of this. And so, of course, a lot still unresolved, but, much to be expected in the coming days.
And David, on that note, part 15 of the 20-point plan includes mentioning Israel and Egypt to, help secure the border there. What are your thoughts on the role of Egypt and other Arab nations here?
Well, Egypt really has to step up to the plate. They were a major part of the problem before October 7th because they were supposed to have secured the border. And as we saw, the border was porous. There was a tremendous amount of corruption in the Egyptian military that allowed a large amount of weaponry and weapons precursors to get into Gaza to build the sort of military force that it had to attack Israel on October 7th, all that was supposed to be prevented by the peace treaty. So Egypt sort of failed on that whole task. And again, a part of it was corruption. Egypt now is being given a second chance. So it really has to step up to the plate also and deliver on this promise of controlling the border and really keeping contraband and stuff that could be used for military purposes from getting into Gaza. Again, it's a problem, though. Egypt itself, it's not entirely in control of all the tribes and all the structures in the Sinai Peninsula adjacent to Gaza. So it's not clear that it's going to be able even to execute its obligations here.
And Jacob, as we wait for phase one to kick in, what will this peace deal look like in practice? What is the timeline we're looking at here?
Well, I think effectively the war is coming to an end with phase one of the deal. Now, phase one may actually draw out, especially with the location, the identification and location of the deceased bodies. That actually, we're hearing from Israeli officials today that actually could take substantial time, potentially. But effectively, and hopefully, with all of the hostages being released, Hamas effectively gives up all of its cards, and then it's kind of a whole new game out there. The planning for the day after, that's all happening, in my view, within a more of a peacetime setting. And Israel has basically, and other states have, the off-ramp they need to move past the Gaza war, which everybody is hopeful for at this point.
And David, speaking of that peacetime setting, before October 7th, the Saudis were actually in talks to join the Abraham Accords. Now, with this deal, kicking off or being signed, how likely are we to see the Abraham Accords expand? Which countries would sign on?
Well, sure. In many ways, it's pretty clear that one of the objectives in launching the October 7th attack on Israel by Hamas and its patron Iran was precisely to derail the Saudi-Israeli rapprochement that was leading to peace. The Saudis here put out to help the Palestinians, and they laid out conditions that there has to be some framework that gives some hope for a Palestinian state. And in the 20-point plan, there's sort of a vague commitment in that direction. And it's quite possible for the Saudis that may be enough now to go over the threshold and enter into peace with Israel. The logic behind peace, though, is not really the resolution of the Palestinian issue for the Saudis. There are deeper issues and deeper strategic interests that Saudi Arabia shares with Israel that have been driving them together. So even if there's no formal peace, what we have is a very meaningful strategic cooperation between Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE right now that is in many ways more important than a formal peace treaty.
And Jacob, very briefly, how does this progress towards peace in the Middle East fit in with American security?
It very directly fits in, as we know well from our history. However much we want to leave the Middle East, it will come back to bring us in bad ways if we don't have a productive and prosperity-focused framework, which of course this administration has. And so I think it's in everybody's interest to create a more stable, peaceful, and prosperous region, not just for communities that live there, but also for the American people as well.
Well, Jacob Olidort, David Wormser, thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.